Hi, I'm Tim Belcher and welcome back to the shop. Today I'm going to be designing and making 3 different leather wallets for the laser, and I'm actually going to be giving some of those away to you guys. So please stay tuned to the end to see how to enter to win. But more importantly, I hope you stay tuned because I think I'm going to show you some things in this video that you've not seen before, both in leatherworking and leatherworking for the laser. So 3 different laser cut leather wallets. This is how I made it. You may or may not recognize this from the channel. I made this over 3 years ago. It is a laser cut bifold wallet, and I've used it every day for 3 years. By far, this has been the favorite wallet that I've ever owned. It does, however, look like it's been through a rock tumbler. I have not done a bit of maintenance to it. Who knows how many times it's gotten wet or washed. I did want to update this design to my new way of making patterns through CAD, through parametric models, and that's this one. This is a very similar bifold wallet, rounded corners, a little bit of a different design, 2 credit cards on each side, pockets for cash, and a bit of fun with the artwork. Now let me introduce you to my concept of a minimalist money clip. This is simply 2 pieces of leather, very frugal on the leather, very easy to stitch, with some hardware that's captured on that inner panel. The outer panel is mathematically controlled to be just a little bit longer than the inner panel. Again, cash in the middle, and that holds your credit cards really tight. This is a 1mm version, maybe a 2-ounce piece of leather. This is the same design in 1.8, maybe a 4-ounce leather, a little bit more substantial. And again, this is the prototype of this that I've used for now over a month. When this is closed, the credit cards are very hard to pull out. However, as I open it slightly, this panel flexes, and now the credit cards are very easy to grab. Great everyday use for the last month. Really impressed with this model. However, I took this model and redesigned it into a billfold. Now this is 3 pieces of leather, outer, mid, and inner panel. Again, the outer panel is designed to be just slightly larger than the mid, inner panel slightly less, so that it folds very tightly and holds the credit cards. Now this is, again, that 1mm, 2-ounce leather, very thin, very easy in the pocket. And this is an example of that in 1.8, maybe 4-ounce leather. A little bit more substantial, but does a great job of holding those credit cards tightly. So these are the 3 different types of wallets we're going to make today. And that brings me to today's special guest star, the new xTool P2 cO2 laser. Now the guys at xTool were nice enough to send me this unit to test with no conditions on my review. And I've been using it for a couple of weeks on these designs, and I'll share some of my thoughts with you as we go through this. So I mentioned I wanted to update that bifold wallet design to my new method of creating these designs, which includes CAD and parametric modeling. But I wanted to do something a little different, something I've never seen on YouTube, and I've searched. I wanted to do this and include a diamond stitching pattern. Now you may know me as the no-stitch leather guy. I certainly like to design things that don't require stitching, but actually I don't mind stitching. It's just when I do it, I prefer diamond stitching over circular punching. For those of you who don't know what diamond stitching is, this is my diamond stitching set, a 1, 2, 4, and a 6-time punch. These are diamond shaped, however, they're not in a straight line, they're actually angled. Let me show you exactly what I mean. If you have a circular pattern to your punches, your thread is simply going to go in a straight line between these holes. And that's fine. Again, not throwing any shade towards this whatsoever, but it's hard to tell sometimes whether this is machine stitched or hand stitched. On a diamond pattern, it's a little bit different. Your stitch is going to go from the top corner of one to the bottom corner of the next. And in practice, that will lay down and form a bit of a pattern. Let me show you here. If I zoom in here, you can clearly see that angled stitching. And to me, this is something that is immediately recognizable as hand stitched. Well, here's the problem. Let's say we come to a corner. Again, on the circles, fairly simple. Pretty easy. I can take my punch all the way down. I can do perhaps an intermediate punch here and keep going. On the diamonds, you'll notice the diamond actually needs to pivot to match, or to at least get in the middle of where you're going to continue on. Again, I'm coming down in this pattern. Suddenly I need to turn this one so that the stitch looks good and it goes around that corner. Now you do that traditionally, let's say this 4 times, I'm doing these 4 punches. Now I need to take a single, line it up correctly, pivot it about halfway, and make this punch. Sometimes that's very difficult. Sometimes you make mistakes. Again, and punching in general can create problems when you're going through multiple pieces of leather to make sure the holes on the top and the holes on the bottom are perfectly aligned. Doing this on a computer in CAD and using a laser to cut these out solves all these problems and makes it much, much simpler. Let me quickly walk you through my model here in Fusion. The sketch is fairly simple. I used my previous measurements but made a few adjustments. Here you see me laying out each of the panels. Now the one on the left is the main body. It'll get mirrored soon. And realize here everything is parametric. Everything is controlled by parameters. I can change the height, the width, the stitching inset, even the size of the punch itself. And here's my diamond punch. And let me turn those on for you just so you can get a good visual here. And this is the first time I pattern in this model, and you can see that it creates sort of a physical representation of those punches. And if I open that pattern up, you can see I can control quite a few things, including making those tines follow the path direction or automatically rotating as they should. I also can control the quantity of the punches and, most importantly, the distance. You can purchase 2mm, 3mm, 5mm punches. Well, with this method, I can make that distance between the tines anything I choose. I'll go through the rest of the model fairly quickly, but you'll see me lay out those punch lines wherever I need. I'll use those punches to cut just the necessary holes in the left side of the main panel. Remember, I'll mirror that later. And then one by one, I'll move the other panels over into the correct position and make all the necessary cuts for those panels. I can then mirror the main panel into one body and then mirror the additional panels correctly so that they line up perfectly. And my model's done. Let me show you the power of parametric designs really quickly. So as I made several of these wallets, I found my stitching holes were just a tiny bit too small. Let's make the holes a bit bigger. I adjust the length and width of the diamond and it recalculates automatically. But now my holes are a bit too close to the edges of a few of my panels, so we can simply adjust the spacing. And what you see me do here in real time is make a permanent change to that pattern. And this change will be included in the actual patterns online. I just think that's very, very cool. Alright, enough of the digital making, let's get on to some actual physical making. Let's make some leather panels we can use on the laser. I'm going to take this shoulder from Weaver Leather. It's a 2 to 3 ounce, I'm thinking 1mm thick hide, and I'm just going to cut it into roughly paper size sheets. I plan on dyeing these sheets a few different colors for these projects. Now this is perhaps one of those things that you haven't seen before. Let's be honest, dyeing leather is a barrier to getting into leatherworking. It just is. I've hand dyed, I've used an airbrush, I've used an HVLP sprayer. This is the easiest and most affordable way you'll find to dye leather well. And I know that's a bold statement. This is a USB rechargeable water sprayer. Amazon sells several brands and it's about 20 bucks. And it does a fantastic job spraying Fibbings Pro leather dye. What I'm doing here is simply diluting the Pro Red leather dye with some denatured alcohol, and I do that right in the bottle. This thing has a fairly low pressure adjustable spray pattern. I set it on about half, and I simply rotate my leather 4 times. I do the back first and then the front. Make sure you mask up and do this in a ventilated area. But I find the overspray much less on this than something like an HVLP sprayer. Since I reduce this dye, I'll store it in a plastic container for later use, but usually I'm pouring this dye right back into the Fibbings bottle. Cleanup is simply rinsing the container and then spraying some water through the sprayer. A single charge gives you an hour or so of spraying, and again, it's 20 bucks. I actually have 3, one backup, one charging, and one that I'm using at any current time. I don't think I'll dye leather any other way. And links to everything I'm using in this video, as always, are in the description down below if you want to try them. So of these 9 panels, I did 3 separate colors: red, a medium brown, and then I did a yellow. And I actually timed myself this time because even I was curious. 9 panels, 3 different colors, 30 minutes start to finish. Now I typically apply leather balm to my panels after I dye them. This is for some protection and to make cleanup simple after I laser them. But these are wallets and they take a lot of abuse. And for these I'm going to use Resolene, which is a much harder acrylic top coat. It'll provide much more protection to the leather and to the engravings. And I'm putting this on simply according to the manufacturer's instructions. I'm using a circular motion and stopping before I overwork it too much. Now Resolene can be a bit streaky, you can overwork it by accident, and some of the results early on don't look very good. But look at this time lapse over 5 minutes of how this product dries clear, and hopefully that can assuage some of the fear. So now I have some panels prepped, I have my SVGs, so now let's go make this on the xTool. Let me take just a minute to tell you about this laser. This is the xTool P2 55-watt CO2 laser. This machine is roughly the same size as the Glowforge Pro, but the cutting area on this machine is 40% larger, 26 by 14 inches compared to 19.5 by 11 on the Glowforge. It's just a much more modern, compact design that results in more cutting capacity. It has dual 16 megapixel cameras, has automatic material depth detection for your autofocus, and can use all of that to map and engrave on curved surfaces. I've had several different lasers in the past, but never such a compact, feature-rich desktop version. Now I will say this, I unboxed this unit and I set it up according to the quick start guide, and I started cutting leather. And that process for me was 2 hours. I did not check or adjust alignment. These units are tested at the factory, and as you saw, they're packed very well. And I wanted to see if the factory alignment made it through the shipping process, and it did. A big part of the user experience here is the software xTool uses to control the laser. I'll probably do a more in-depth review of the xTool Creative Space software in future videos, but it's very, very simple. You get a visual representation of the laser bed and the material you've placed on it. You import your SVGs, you visually place them. I'm then going to grab a PNG file that I've created for some artwork, in this case this skull and rose pattern, and I'm going to put it close to the SVG. And then I'll just simply use the tools that are provided by the xTool Creative Space to horizontally and vertically align them. I'll select what I want to etch and move it to its own layer. I'll select that layer and choose to engrave and then set my power and speed. And then I'll choose the layer with my cut lines, set that layer to cut, and again apply my power and speed settings. I'll click off my layers and set my material thickness simply by clicking here and telling it to measure anywhere on the material. And then I just press start. It's as simple as that. Engraving on this laser is pretty fast. 600 millimeters per second engrave, 250 millimeters per second cut, which I think is fairly similar to some of these mid-range OM Tech products. And because we finished our leather and added a top coat, cleaning it is as simple as rubbing it off with a dry rag. According to the power you use, you may see some charring around the edges, maybe even in the stitch line. A very lightly damp rag should get rid of that if you did a top coat before you cut. And 3 different wallet designs, 3 different colors. I did quite a few panels. And I think both the accuracy and the detail are pretty impressive right out of the box. This is only 100 lines per inch. I haven't even played with advanced settings, but look at that stitch line, absolutely flawless. Now that we have a lot of pieces and parts of various wallets, let's glue and stitch these guys up. Let's take that standard minimal bifold first, and this is fairly straightforward. I'll glue up the large inner panel and the first larger card pocket, and then I'll stitch up the center area to stop the card from slipping too far down. And then I'll glue the smaller card panel on it and stitch just the inner side only. Now I'm going to burnish that inner edge, as I won't be able to burnish it after the wallet's assembled. And I should mention that at this point you should burnish the top of those credit card pockets as well. I'll then glue both the assembled inner panels to the main panel, and I'll stitch around both sides. And then I can burnish the outside of the wallet. Here are the large panels and that first credit card slot glued and stitched together. Here are both inner assemblies together, the inner line stitched and that inner edge burnished. And here's the completely assembled wallet, and you can really see that nice, perfect stitch line. Now let's take that second one and go into a little more detail. Again, this is already after I've burnished the top of those 2 credit card pockets. I'm going to take the large inner panel and the first credit card pocket, and then I'm going to slightly scuff and sand the stitch line. Now this is very necessary when I use leather balm, a wax-based product, but with this acrylic finish, I actually don't find this step to be completely necessary. And now I'm going to take some contact cement, some barge, and I'm going to be very careful trying to keep the glue on the stitch line and to the edge. When you put that first credit card pocket on, notice what stitch you need to actually start the glue at. You don't want to put glue where that credit card pocket is not going to cover. And of course, contact cement goes on the back edge of that first credit card pocket, and you need to give it 5 to 10 minutes to dry. Here I've done that inner stitch and applied the third panel, and contact cement really grabs the first time, but you can manipulate it just a little bit and get those edges perfect. Here you see me pinching the edges and rolling the leather, pinching it and pulling it straight just to make sure my edges are very, very close to perfect. Now, my burnishing 101, a little bit of water and a cap or something like that, some Tokonol, and finally an inexpensive burnishing tool. I'll get a little bit of water on my finger and carefully wet that edge. I'll find a groove on that burnishing tool that's slightly larger than the edge, and I'll rub. Now, this is not necessarily about a lot of pressure. I would say mild pressure and speed would do a better job burnishing than significant pressure. You can actually deform the leather. The entire intent behind burnishing is simply to seal the edge, and you'll see me use water multiple times, use that same groove, sometimes a narrower groove, and sometimes the end of that tool to get a nice flat sealed edge just using water. And by the way, if your edges aren't perfectly straight, now's the time to use a little sandpaper. And now for the Tokonol, which is a wax and a gum-based product, and it's really designed simply to seal that edge and also provide a little bit of a shine as you burnish it. You'll see me use my finger, put a little bit on the edge, make sure you don't get it on the face, and then repeat the burnishing process one more time. This is a little bit of work, and it does make a significant difference in the finished product. And leatherworkers love to drool over edges. When you're done, if you've done a good job, it should look almost like one piece of leather. Well, if you sat through my burnishing 101, let me give you a saddle stitch 101. I'm certainly no expert here, but this is how I do it. I am using size 1 leather needles and 0.6mm Ritz waxed tiger thread. Peel off 4 to 5 times the length you want to stitch. 4 times is usually enough, it's just going to give you anxiety near the end. 5 times is probably easier. After you thread it, lay the end of the thread down and stab it about an inch from the end. Pull that end over the needle and back onto the thread. Use your fingernail to smooth the knot and pull the knot back to the needle. And then just simply repeat on the other side. Always, always use a stitching post. Don't even try not to use one. They're cheap on Amazon. I always stitch up. I always stitch right hand first. If you're left-handed, it's probably left hand first. Put your needle through the first hole and make sure the thread is even. Now come through on the right and pull almost halfway through. As I get close to the end, I hook my middle finger in the loop that is forming, and I pinch the thread that has gone through the hole against the thread in the loop with my thumb. This lets me apply a little bit of downward pressure on that right thread, clearing the hole for the left needle. This helps me avoid piercing the thread that's already in the hole. As I push the left needle halfway through the hole, I can release the pinch, and then I wrap the top of the loop over that needle. I can then grab the needle with my right hand and pull it all the way through. All right, quickly, let me show you on a different piece of leather the view from the other side. I come through on the right, and I hook my middle finger into that loop. I'll then pinch that thread with the loop, and that gives me support for the left needle. I'm going to come through with the left, I'm going to grab the top of the loop from behind the needle over it, and then pull that needle all the way through. That loop over the needle actually creates a half hitch in the stitch. It helps keep the stitch tight as you move on to the next hole. As I pull the threads tight, I do so with a little pressure. I tend to pull up with my left hand and down with my right, and I try to apply the same pressure every stitch. With practice, I can get 6 or 7 holes per minute using this technique. It's certainly not an expert two-handed technique, but it is a good technique to get consistent results. When I finish, I backstitch 2 or 3 holes, and when you backstitch, simply pull all the way through on each thread and ignore the loop. Finally, I'll trim and melt the ends of those threads. So now we know how to glue up panels, we know how to burnish, and now we know how to stitch. That's all you need to make these wallets. And this panel is actually the inside panel for that money clip design. And that stitch on the interior panel actually captures the money clip hardware. No glue necessary there. This is a very simple design, only 2 panels. The only trick is you have to glue up and stitch one side at a time. That's because that outer layer is a little bit longer and it's not going to want to lay flat. When I get to the second panel, I tend to fold it as I stick it together because that's the natural shape of this design. And when I do this, not only do I check the edges and use my fingers as guides, I actually hold it up to the light to make sure those stitching holes are clear. Then I'll stitch the second side, burnish it, and add the hardware. Now the money clip hardware is actually a very tight fit. Feel free to grab a screwdriver and stretch that hole out a little bit before you push that in. Lastly, we have the billfold, an inside panel, a middle panel, and an outside panel, and these go together very similarly to the money clip, meaning you need to glue and stitch one side at a time. And the only tricky part for that is you have to glue one panel together at a time just because of the nature of contact cement. So often I'll prep 2 sides, then let them dry with something that'll hold them apart. When you're finished stitching, burnish this one and you're done. Pretty simple, pretty quick to put together. Well, there you go, 3 separate laser cut wallet designs, a bifold wallet, a money clip, and a billfold. I know this was a packed video, but when I release designs like this, I want a single video that shows you absolutely everything you need to do to make these yourself. And as usual, these designs will be available fairly cheaply on my Etsy site. Link is in the description down below. Well, that certainly was a long one. Thank you very, very much for sticking it out. Let me first thank xTool for sending me the P2, and let me give you some final thoughts on this. Here's my current setup. I have an OM Tech 80-watt laser. I've upgraded the air assist. I've upgraded to an external compressor. That goes through a water separation filter into the actual system, and it's wired in so that it works with light burn. I've actually upgraded the exhaust fan, core drilled through my wall, and I've added a water chiller. That's a lot to turn on, not to mention the computer, plugging up through USB, etc. So I've got to ask myself, which would I use on a daily basis if I just wanted to get a quick project done? And the truth is, easily I would use the P2. It's just simpler, it's quicker, and it's just easier to use. I also mentioned that I'm going to give some of these wallets away to you guys. All you have to do to enter to win is to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and over the next couple of weeks, I'll pick a couple of those comments and include them in the next video, and I'll ship those wallets off to you wherever you are in the world. Again, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.